Welcome to FAQ PhD Part 3. Sir, so when we have such protocol of the structure of the process, the important mandatory formats, table of content and everything, does one actually have a freedom to express oneself in a PhD? How a PhD done by me would be different from a PhD done by you? Does it have that scope of individual's version of doing it?
Um, there is a structure to PhD. It is not free writing. So when we say we are creating new scientific knowledge, obviously we cannot say what we believe in. That does not mean what we believe in cannot be correct. So if I have to say in my PhD, the sun rises in the east. If I want to write this statement in my thesis, I cannot say sun rises in the east because I know it and everyone around me knows it. I will have to say sun rises in the east, bracket, NASA, 1990. That 1990, I'm giving a hypothetical example. NASA
Mhm.
found out sun rises in the east. They did experiments and they concluded that it rises in the east, and then they published the paper. And the paper was accepted by the peer reviewing community, and nobody has objected to it as yet. So it stands uncontested. And therefore, I can say sun rises in the east. Meaning, till you come to the chapter of conclusion and discussion, you don't have any freedom. Every statement that you write has to be of somebody and he has to be mentioned in the bracket. Because if you start saying what you feel, then it brings in looseness, it gives away the rigor of research. So when we say we are generating new knowledge from existing knowledge, what is the existing knowledge we are using? What is the quality of that input raw material? And the input raw material has to come only from published papers of others, and published papers also in the peer reviewed journals, not those which are not peer reviewed. So we can take material in the PhD till the chapter of conclusion and discussion and conclusion. Till that chapter, we can, if you want to write something, you can write something only if, and I'm talking particularly about introduction, literature review, and research methodology. These three chapters, right? Of course, hypothesis you write on your own, objectives you write on your own, but these three chapters, the most descriptive chapters, introduction, literature review, research methodology, every statement has to have a backing from someone, and that backing has to be such that it is taken either from a paper published in a peer-reviewed journal or it is taken from a thesis of somebody else. And you can imagine how many theses and how many papers you will need to fill up those 30 pages and 20 pages.
Exactly.
Because you want everything to be so solid that it is taken from very solid research. Take an example, when you complete your PhD, somebody will be quoting you that there is a strong relation between a working mother and the occurrence of NPD, Bhavna Sharma 2027. So your PhD, the entire 3 years work will give people not more than 10 statements to quote from. So you will be working day and night for 3 years, and at the end of it, generate not more than 10 to 15 statements to quote from. Some of academic nature, some of applied nature.
Applied nature.
So because we have to write every statement taken from somebody, we need a heap of papers and theses. And that cannot be done from Google Scholar. You have to subscribe to EBSCO or JSTOR. And then only you can write introduction and literature review. So in that sense, you don't have freedom till you reach discussion and conclusion. There, you are trying to explain why you have found what you have found. So findings of the study will be what you have found. And then the question comes, why you have found what you have found. That is where the theoretical knowledge comes in and your experience comes in. So when you come to the chapter of discussion and conclusion, you are discussing why you have found what you have found and what does it mean for academics and for application. That is where you are completely free to express yourself in the context, of course, of the thesis and the findings. Then limitations of the study, again, you are free. Recommendations, you are free. But till that chapter, you don't have much freedom except to quote from others. We can't say this is so because everyone knows it or I know it. And that is where it's very different to have worked in a particular area for 15 years and to do a PhD in that area. It's very different. It is not experience, it is actually scholarship.
Yes.
Scholarship. So, in literature review, in research methodology, and in introduction, every statement needs a bracket. You cannot write any statement which is not attributable to anybody, and that anybody has to be a paper published in a peer-reviewed journal or a thesis. If you want slight liberty, you can quote from books. But many universities object even to quoting from books because book is not peer-reviewed. Anybody can write anything in the book.
Not even the curriculum books?
Curriculum books are slightly different because that will bring us to how the curriculum books are made. So the curriculum books are made by taking material from papers and thesis.
Papers and the thesis. Absolutely.
So
basically, whatever you mention it, you should be able to mention the resource, which is with the citation of the year and done by whom.
Correct. So that is where the citation has many methods, and usually we use APA method, American Psychological Association method. There are other methods also of how to do a citation. But the best is when you use a paper, go to Google Scholar and type the title, and in Google, you can automatically download the citation. So you don't have to type out the very tedious thing of brackets and comma. It's very tedious.
It is.
So whenever you quote any thesis or paper, if you go to JSTOR or if you go to EBSCO, they allow you to download the citation. So you can ready-made save and copy and paste that citation. Or if it's not available, then go to Google Scholar and type that title of the paper, and with that the citation will come. You can download the citation. So there are many methods. One method is APA, which normally we use. So this is how the flow happens.
What is conceptual model of study and why is it so important?
It's the core of the whole thing because it tells you what are the variables you are studying and what is the relationship between them. And you may have different situations like one dependent variable being determined by 5 or 7 independent variables and one-to-one relationships. Or you can have a more complex situation where you have one variable determined by 2 variables, each of which is determined by other 2 variables. So, or you may be just looking at 2 sets of data, whether they have a relationship or not, a control group and a non-control group. And that is where, based upon what is the nature of research, is it exploratory, that in some area nobody has done anything and you are for the first time breaking it open, that will be exploratory research. Then there's confirmatory research, where you are looking at X causing Y, which is one of the most difficult forms of research. Then you can have a correlationship type of researches, where 2 are correlated or not correlated. Is there a significant difference between the 2 or not significant difference between the 2? Usually the Z test, the T test, the NOR, that kind of thing, which is essentially based upon presence or absence of correlation, significance or not significance, strength of it, and so on. That is one type of it. Exploratory, another type of it. And most difficult is confirmatory. Because in confirmatory, it is not that whether there is statistical significant difference between the two sets or not. You are saying X is caused by Y, or A, B, C, D, E together cause X. And the relationship is such that A causes X to the tune of 3%, B to the tune of 5%, and so on and so forth. So the most difficult.
In the concept itself, like for a confirmatory one, one may later on theorize something out of the findings. But for example, of the study topic you just shared, if the null hypothesis is accepted by chance, um, does that challenge the existing theory?
Uh, yes, it will be. For example, let us say it comes out that there is no relationship between the mother being working or non-working and the occurrence of NPD. Then the Kleinian ideas of object loss and my own ideas in the Valley Junction model, they will get disproved. That is one part of it. Now, another part of it is, let us say you're looking at working mothers and non-working mothers. And you find a situation, the conclusion is, in case of working mothers, the occurrence of NPD is higher.
Higher.
Right? That is a finding. Now, the second statement is, does a working mother cause NPD?
Exactly.
It's a more
So the findings will actually lead to some concrete finding.
correct. So correlation is not causality.
Okay.
So these are two different kinds of PhD theses. You can have a correlation based thesis or you can have a causality based thesis. Causality based thesis is a more difficult thing to do, because there you are claiming that X is causing Y or ABCDE is causing X.
Exactly.
So when you talk of causality, that this is determining this, those are very strict studies, and there you use a different kind of software called CFA, right? Or you use
Okay.
structural modeling and you use confirmatory factor analysis. And the difficulty there is that when you actually sit to operate CFA, often you run into situations where first you have to do exploratory factor analysis, EFA, and then go to CFA. And you
Okay.
plan out the CFA based upon the findings of EFA. So
Obviously.
causality studies are very different, confirmatory studies they are called. But if you are looking at whether there is significant difference between the two and whether there is a correlation between the two, this is slightly
Right.
softer study, easier to do.
So the hypothesis will have the word significant
Significant.
relationship.
It will not have causal.
Yes.
It will not use the word cause. It will use the word
Mm.
significant.
Significant.
Significant relation. It will not use causal relation.
Mm. Mm. So is there something called scale development? You mentioned in between also that an individual researcher may have to develop an scale.
Ideally, yes. Ideally, the tool that you are going to use in research has to be developed by you. That is ideal. But that itself takes 2 to 3 years, and many people in the West actually do a PhD, which ends up in development only of the tool.
Okay.
So their PhD stops at that tool, that I am going to develop a new test for narcissism. And all that they do is to keep testing the tool over and over again till they finally develop it. So there are some
Oh,
PhDs which end up with a tool. So some end with the scale development, because the scale under question is of a very fundamental nature and of great use. There are other
true.
PhDs where the scale development is done, the tool development as we call is done, where you take 1 to 1.5 years. And I knew of somebody who did a full-time PhD and a real scale development. He took 7 years,
Oh,
full-time 7 years. So scale
And
development is a
actually, scales are really valuable for the future researchers as well.
correct. So for example, if you say what causes narcissism and you make a list of 25 factors, say absent mother, too much pampering, uh, deprivation of objects around you,
Only child.
only child, you can make a list of say 15 factors. So first what you will do is you will do exploratory factor analysis and find out how the correlation is happening. You will keep the stronger ones, you will remove the weaker ones. And then you will go for something causal, the confirmatory
Mm.
analysis, and find out,
Confirmatory.
and then you will test it out in different places to find the reliability of it. And when the validity, reliability, average variance extracted, all of that, and the model fit in CFA, that happens, then after some trials and errors, you will test it out on people. And if it turns out well, then you freeze that. So that itself is an exercise by itself. So that is called scale development process. In most cases, people don't go for it, and they either use ready-made scales or they use half-tested scales. So in psychology, mostly you use ready-made scales. You don't do scale development.
You also mentioned about the table, which is a hypothesis vis-a-vis questions. What it is?
Often you end up the survey and you realize that certain information needed for proving or disproving a particular hypothesis is missing. And the only way then is either to redo a survey or drop that hypothesis. And mostly people drop the hypothesis. Very few can afford to really redo the survey. And if a fundamental hypothesis is to be dropped, then of course the thesis will go, and therefore you have to redo the survey. So it is always better to have a check that in a table, write down all the hypotheses you have in one column, and in the second column, write down question numbers which will give you the information to prove or disprove. And the important point here is on this sit with the guide. Don't do it yourself. Because it may be very well possible that you have questions to get some information, but that information will not help you to prove or disprove.
Mm.
So it's not just having information. We want information of a particular type, which will go into a statistical test. And the statistical test will prove or disprove.
So do we even explain the questions which supposedly, other than the narcissistic personality inventory, we have the questionnaire? Do we even explain the questionnaire, why this question has been put, or the basis of the selection of the question? Do we have to mention that?
Not to the respondent.
Okay.
To the guide, yes, not to the respondent.
No, in the written thesis.
Huh. In the written thesis, when you are writing the chapter of research methodology, in that there will be a mention of the questionnaire. That what is the nature of the questionnaire, how many questions, why only these questions, why
Okay.
this tool was selected, right? And what is the intent behind it? Like, let us say I can ask a question in yes and no format. I can ask the same question in highly satisfied to highly unsatisfied 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 format. I can ask the same question in the ranking format. So why do you use a particular format of question? That all gets explained there. And that has to depend upon the nature of what is being explored in the question and the software into which you are going to put that information. Certain softwares will require information in certain formats only. Like in certain tests, you can use only scaled data 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In certain tests,
Likert states.
yeah, Likert scale. In certain tests, you can use only yes and no type of answers. You cannot process 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In certain tests, you can only process rank 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it also based upon what is the test you are going to put forward. It's like certain machines can process only certain raw materials. So we have to be very clear with the guide that if I ask this question, what is the respondent likely to say? He is likely to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, either of this. Will that go into a statistical test and help me prove or disprove a hypothesis? So that is where the table comes in. That this table, once you mix it with the guide before one embarks for the survey.
Is survey the only way to carry out the research? Or is it necessary always to do a survey?
No, technically it is not. There are many ways of doing a thesis and research without the survey. Unfortunately, in India, people don't appreciate it, don't allow it. So in India, it is compulsory, but actually it is not compulsory. There are many alternatives to a survey. Some people do a PhD abroad only on the basis of in-depth interviews, which are very few in number but very long. Some people use only focus group discussions. Some people use only case study methods. But unfortunately, in India, a PhD usually means a survey.
Being such a diverse and populated country, I think it is more sensible to stick to the cultural aspect of taking out a survey. Being so diverse.
There's also the knowledge
How does
aspect that most uh, professors, they are not equipped in terms of knowledge to handle other forms of survey or other forms of study.
auto setting?
They know survey, many know only the survey.
How does one decide upon the sample size?
There
What are
are
the criteria to draw it?
there are many ways of uh, doing it. One is whatever method you use, there is generally some formula for sample size. So one is the formula. Just Google what is the formula, go to the guide and ask it. So whatever you do, there is a formula, number one. Number two, there are rules of thumb based upon practice. That if you have a very large sample size, some people say 1% is good enough. But what is 1% of 150 crores? So one has to be practical. Second is, uh, so first is use the formula. Second is rule of thumb. Third is the requirement of the sampling method. Like whether you are doing simple random, stratified random, cluster, snowball, judgmental, which method are you using? Each method has its own relation to the size. And the more random you go, the larger becomes the size. So the third element is which method you are using. Fourth is the necessity of the test that you are using. And fifth is the software that you are using. So when you put all the five together, take the highest of the five. And unfortunately, in many universities, they have their own ideas of what is the minimum sample. So that also we have to factor in what the university will allow. This is how you determine the sample size.
What is the expected output of a good PhD? Or to establish the good research, what would be the criteria?
Uh, a good PhD will have outputs in two areas. One is academic, second is practical. So academically, it has to open up a new area or develop a new area or disprove something people were believing in or explore as many variables as you can in that research or do a difficult research which others found it difficult to do. That is academic part. Second part is applied. Okay, what can industry do? How can the industry use it? Or how can the government or NGO use it? Or how can a therapist use it in practice? So there will be two outputs of any PhD, the academic outputs and the applied outputs, and both of them have to be adequate and useful enough to justify the whole effort.
Basically, the goal should be met. Goal of the research.
You must contribute something in the academic area, something in the practical area, and the contribution has to be enough to justify this 3-year effort.
How is generally the experience of doing a PhD? Is it a really laborious, in depth diving into the depths of the theories? already existing and then creating new? What it is all about?
It's a very difficult experience. Very few people would have a pleasant experience. It's very difficult because of certain reasons. Reason one is intellectually, it's a very difficult exercise. And it's certainly not a do-it-yourself exercise. Without a guide and without the kind of guidance that we are talking about today, and hand holding at every chapter, you can't move forward. It's not a do it by yourself kind of thing. That is one. Second, certain points of the PhD, you really require a big leap of intuition and insight or creativity. And everyone doesn't have it. So in good universities, many people drop PhDs because they can't have that intellectual and creative leap which is required, and the university will not accept an ordinary output. In ordinary universities, there is no dropout because everyone comes in, goes out with a certificate. So that is not there, but it's a very difficult thing. That it's not a regular kind of education. You need giant leaps at certain points. Say, for example, creating the conceptual model of the study, creating the questionnaire, interpreting the question, the outcomes, especially those which are difficult to interpret. So this is one part of it. Second part of it is it's personally very taxing, especially if you're doing it from a very good universities. Divorces happen in PhD. It taxes the people so much.
We need to do research on that.
Ah, then there is this whole university system difficulty, that how you get along with the guide and the university. There's nothing like a perfect research. Anybody can find holes if one wants to. And because the student is doing it for the first time, he is going to make mistakes. So what happens is often the research committees change. So you make a presentation in first semester to one committee, and second semester second committee. What the first committee understood and said, what the second committee understands and said, it's a merry-go-round. So that is second difficulty, the whole university system. The third is the way subjects are chosen. That when you choose a subject, you are not done adequate literature review. You have not done outline thinking of data difficulties. That's the third thing. And the fourth thing is the whole process. That when you submit a synopsis, they will take 6 months to send it to 5 people and get expert opinion. Then you submit the thesis, again they send it to 5 people, get an expert opinion. So practically 1 year gets wasted in that. So all of it creates that whole difficulty. And academically, what you realize is how many corners you have cut and how many compromises you have made in your research. So what it does is it introduces you to how to do research. It gives you some faith in research. At the same time, it takes away much of your faith in research. That if you have done too much research, you don't have much faith in research. Because you have seen how at every step compromises are done. Inaccuracies seeping. And how you are narrowing your framework, leaving out important variables because they cannot be studied. You don't have the intellectual capability to study them or the resources to study them. And you have created an artificial framework, an artificial isolation of a phenomena, and you are studying it there. And in reality, phenomena is not so isolated and not so easy. And there are too many variables, too many things out of control, and therefore the applicability of what you are doing is severely restricted and limited. So some people say doing a bad PhD is not a bad idea. And some people say first you do PhD and then you do research. Meaning in PhD, all that you do is you learn how to do research, and the real research you do later.
Later.
So it is a very complex experience, but it does train you for a higher level of intellectual thinking in the area which a master's program cannot. And really trains you to be a good consultant, researcher, and academic. There's no doubt about it. There is a difference between somebody who has done a PhD and not done a PhD. It's worth it.
During my master's, I remember when we were being motivated to do our research work, my professor had mentioned to all of us that this is going to be your first official book. Well, I get the point there that it was something we are putting our heads into and finding and going technically correct with every single aspect. Technically, again, the question is, can a thesis be cast into a book?
Very much so. Very much so. The substance is there. Any thesis has enough substance to be cast into a book. Of course, you have to rewrite it because the language of the thesis and the language of a book are two different ways of expressing oneself. The thesis language is cast in the way it is because of the objective of rigor and exactness. Usability is not a criteria. Likability of the reader is not a criteria.
Not juicy.
Yeah, not juicy, not spicy,
And
not
decorated.
not relishable. Yeah, but when you write a book, all these factors come in. You have to make it usable, likable, easy to read, slightly spicy, slightly juicy, slightly likable. So you will have to uh, rewrite it using the same substance, same findings. But it can always be cast into a book. In fact, it's a
Because
tragedy.
when we read the great theories, especially in the field of psychology or Freud, and that the writings itself are so difficult, but they are not based like a research writing. It is very experiential in nature.
Correct.
So that from there, I was just thinking about that. What if it is converted as it is into a book?
So the color and flavor of the writing has to change. In the book, you're talking to the reader. In the thesis, you're talking to the scientific facts. So the color and flavor of the talk is different. It's a tragedy, however, that most theses, although they have the potential to be converted into a book, they are not converted. They,
Never made it.
yeah, they never make it to the market, to the society, and most of the thesis work remains hidden, unused in libraries. It should be cast into a book.
Educative, informative, and helpful. I'm sure many scholars will be helped by this conversation. Thank you so much, Dr. Vaidya. See you all again. Namaste.
Namaste.